we speak about security in education. We will have at the end of the session 20 minutes to cover all your questions. But if you have any questions during the webcast, please feel free to use our chat box. My name is Anila Prinzan. I work as an account manager here at Risual. I focus on helping customers like you to optimize the Microsoft investment. With me today is Dan Cubley. He is our data security expert, and he will be our main presenter for today's webcast. Before I hand over to Dan, let me tell you a little bit more about us. We are a Microsoft Partner of the Year 2015 winner and 2016 finalist. We offer managed services, technology, consultancy, bespoke solutions, and training. Specialists in all things Microsoft. We can help you get more from your Microsoft investment to achieve your personal and company goals. We are proud to have been helping customers in public sector, commercial sector for over 15 years to maximize the return of their Microsoft investment and overcome any challenge they face around the cloud, business, and digital transformation. The topic for our webinar today is providing you with trends in education businesses. Digital transformation is key. With a globally competitive market, students like to travel all over the world to go to the best universities. The only way to grow is to attract students. You as an organization need to offer more of what you do, but in a virtual environment. Engaging teachers, students, with any time, anywhere, with any device. The market is changing, and universities, colleges are struggling with challenges, and we can help you overcome this. We helped, as you can see from our slides, many universities, colleges, and international schools and academies to get a better return on their Microsoft investments. Some of our work we are doing at the moment, such as security password audited, our optimization, and much more, we feel is particularly relevant at the education sector at the moment. Dan is going to talk in more detail about our work when he will cover slide 18. Dan, over to you now.
Yep, hello everyone. Thanks, Anila. So just a little bit more about myself. So like Anila's hinted to, so I'm kind of working our security team at Risual. We put together some offerings which I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm a techie myself, so I deal a lot with these technologies that I'm going to talk about. I'm not sure the audience that we've kind of engaged yourselves, so I'll keep it kind of medium level. There will be some technical aspects I'm going to go into, and there'll be some more higher level stuff later. But yeah, let's get stuck into it. So we're going to be covering stuff around Azure, data and AI, so modern workplace mechanics, and some stuff around dynamics. So how can we secure some of these things? So I thought I'd just start by talking about what some of the security challenges are in education. So obviously yourselves coming from an education background will obviously be aware of some of these. So some things I'd like to highlight is that the education sector has some of the highest rates of ransomware. That was obviously a big thing with some of the WannaCry and some of the other attacks that were sort of towards the end of last year and this year. So ransomware. So things like the Commissioner has advised schools to be particularly vigilant around information security and things in higher education. Obviously, some of the things that we apply to public sector also apply to kind of the edu sector as well. So things like unauthorized access to systems, personal information, accessibility, particularly harmful information around that can be gathered around pupils and staff and parents. So these are people that could potentially be willing to seek compensation, and having access to some of this information is obviously crucial to protect in the education sector. There's obviously damages and those associated with education. I picked out some of the more relevant things around keeping students safe when they're kind of on systems. So obviously your stuff around your bullying and your harassment and stuff might be more prevalent in the education industry than some of the other industries. And it's not easy when some of these students are quite tech savvy as well. Particularly in up and coming students, they're kind of used to using this technology on a day-to-day basis, whereas maybe in the past that wasn't maybe the case. So they tend to. You might have the student that myself would be an example at school, where you could constantly looking for holes and things in IT systems to get one over on the IT department or something like that. So tech savvy students is a big one in the education industry. Some of the challenges. So how real is the threat? So I've just put some findings on here from the JISC, so the UK non-profit supporting higher education and research, and also the HEPI, UK independent think tank for higher education. They recently did a survey beginning of this year, I believe, around cybersecurity in education. Some of the key findings from that was the under penetration testing, so kind of ethical hacking, was kind of lacking in the education industry compared to some of the other public sector workspaces. Also, the fact that they were getting more and more call outs to respond to kind of security incidents, particularly like the things I mentioned earlier around ransomware and access to personal information. And then also as well, during 2018, they kind of highlighted over 1,000 kind of denial of service attacks. So in the education industry, we're getting more and more education partners adopt kind of cloud-based technologies and online systems that students can go in and access from wherever they are. And it's these kind of systems which are being targeted by attackers to have an effect on those. So I've also put some information on there around what the government have released. So the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. So they did a 2019 survey around cybersecurity breaches. The key message is that cyber attacks are a persistent threat to businesses and charities. While fewer businesses have identified breaches or attacks than before, the ones that have identified are particularly experiencing more of them. Some key stats on there. I don't know whether you can read it. That 32% are increased over time spent by staff looking at these kind of breaches and attacks. Half, so kind of 21% reported that half the staff had to stop carrying out their daily work because as a result of an attack. Quite a when we're answering kind of how real is the threat, the answer would probably be quite real. So what can we do about it? So some of the common blockers around improved security. So obviously the time taken to implement, monitor, update systems to protect yourselves against kind of cyber breaches. The investment, so the cost of implementation, any consultancy or third parties involved, the costs of licensing, the purchasing of software and hardware to actually implement and improve security posture. Some people may be adverse to change. In the education sector, obviously, there might be certain ways that students have always worked or staff have worked, and there might be adverse to kind of adopting new ways of working because of the improved security of working in that manner. And there's also the skills and the knowledge to implement some of these systems and security measures to kind of protect yourselves against these cyber breaches. Obviously, this is where people like ourselves, Risual, can come in and help yourselves. So let's talk about some tech. So from a Risual standpoint, and definitely from a Microsoft standpoint, the key message is protecting the identity. So I kind of use a castle scenario. So back in the day, you might have an internal IT system and you're building kind of your layers. So you might have a fortress, and you're building your layers of technology around that fortress to kind of make it as difficult as possible for the attacker to get in. In the modern way of working now, we've got people on the road, we've got people working from home, we've got people accessing from various different locations. So kind of from a Microsoft standpoint, how can we still maintain a good security posture while we've got people accessing from all over the world, we've got people accessing from different places, accessing from different systems. You know, we haven't got the same level of control anymore that we used to have around issuing out different devices and controlling those. So basically, we're giving everybody a key to the system, and that key is the identity. So what can we do to protect the identity? So we've got technologies in the cloud, such as Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory is similar to your on-premise Active Directory, obviously cloud-based. And we're using the technologies within Azure Active Directory to control where people are accessing from. So with conditional access rules, we can control the devices that people are accessing from. So are they corporate issued devices? Are they personal devices? Do we want to allow personal devices? What sort of devices are they? Are they Windows devices? Are they Android devices? Are they iOS devices? You know, we can control those, what devices they're accessing from. We can control the location. So do we allow people only access from the university, or do we only allow them access from a particular college or school, or do we allow them access from elsewhere? And through using technologies like this, so we've got the ability to control access to various different systems. So we have one identity. The useful of that is obviously for your students and your users. They don't have to remember lots of different accounts and passwords. You know, we have a single identity that users access from, and they can use this identity to integrate with different third-party systems. And we can also apply kind of 2FA to that, so multi-factor authentication. So we're controlling, we're trying to verify that the person who is accessing these systems is who they say they are. And that could be like a message to a phone, or a text message, or a phone call, or something like that, just to ensure that the user who is accessing this system is the person that they say they are. So protecting identity is key in maintaining a good security posture. So whether it's you know, a student or a teacher or something that's lost their password, or stolen credentials, you know, logins are kind of the common denominator in most cyber attacks on schools and universities. So the fact that we can now control logon management, and that kind of being the earliest warning sign of an attack, kind of we can limit kind of the false positives and actually stop attacks before they happen through controlling the logon process and protecting the identity. So basically the message here is that we should establish an effective process for managing privilege to systems, and control kind of how users are accessing those systems. So controlling the identity is key. I've just talked about conditional access. So the key thing there is kind of user and location based. So are we controlling where they're accessing from? Device based, so we can control what devices, what methods they're using to access those systems. Risk based, so we can build some AI and some clever heuristics that Microsoft have got working in the background to work out whether a user is identified as at risk, and we can then automate the process of controlling whether they can access. So once they become at risk, or they have a risk score associated to that user, we can prevent them from accessing certain key resources automatically, you know, without having to raise a ticket or go through the internal IT department or have somebody consistently monitor that. So we can automate that process, and we can have kind of application-based conditional access control. So controlling not only the device which can access, but what application you're accessing that system from, we can control. So moving on, another key layer of protecting end users is protecting the devices themselves. So protecting the mobile device if they're accessing kind of on the road from a, like I talked about earlier, iOS or Android devices. Protecting the corporate data itself, which is housed within those applications and things that they're using on those devices, and obviously also protecting the workstation. So protecting the mobile device, we're talking about mainly a technology called Intune, and we're talking about applying enrollment measures to those devices to allow us to control, say for example, these devices get lost or stolen, we can remotely wipe those devices in that event. So protecting that data, we can apply encryption measures to those devices. Obviously, we might have students accessing from personal devices, so we could instead of protecting the phone at the phone layer, so rather than when the student leaves or is not using corporate university resources anymore, rather than wiping their entire device, which they're not going to be too happy about, we can just wipe the corporate data housed on those devices. So using what we call bring your own device enrollment, we can protect the data at the app layer rather than the phone layer. So we're segregating corporate data from personal data. We're encrypting just the corporate data. We're preventing kind of backups to kind of third-party systems. You might have like your iCloud account. So if you've got some university data housed on this device, we can prevent it from being backed up to different systems that are outside of the university's control. We can also prevent kind of like printing and screen capturing and things like that. Prevent cut copy paste and to different apps and systems. So it's just about kind of controlling the flow and movement of that data. And then there's also kind of protecting the workstation. So in the traditional sense, particularly in the public sector industry, we used to have kind of a golden image approach to issuing devices. So we would build a device, have a kind of golden image approach to it. It would install all our apps, all our programs, add all our security measures to it, and that was great. But times have moved on. We now adopt more cloud technologies. So we use technologies like Autopilot, where we can literally just go to any store in the UK or around the world, pick up a device off the shelf, and we can connect that to corporate resources or university resources through Autopilot, and we can sync all our security measures and all our user apps and things to that device automatically. So we know it's going to be safe and secure, but we haven't actually had to touch the IT department in the first place to access device, and it comes back to the identity which I was talking about earlier. And through that, we can also apply all the same controls that you would. So your encryption. There's lots of different technologies now around Defender and kind of going passwordless with Hello for Business. That's a key one at the moment for Microsoft. So adopting kind of biometrics and clever kind of public key, private key controls within the cloud to kind of verify that users who they say they are, without having to actually authenticate with a password. Because obviously passwords are now no longer secure. We talked about MFA earlier. That's a key technology to kind of get to that stopgap. I hope I'm not going too technical for you guys. If you are, obviously, say in the chat, and if you've got any questions, obviously we'll address them at the end. Yeah, going passwordless is a key one at the moment. And there's also the ability now to kind of monitor all your Defender and attacks and malware and things which are happening on the devices from the cloud through Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. That's a key technology now which will enable you to not only kind of respond to attacks by kind of isolating devices from the network or gathering telemetry data and all that kind of stuff. You're also looking to see whether your security posture, so whether you're susceptible to kind of known attacks that are out there. So things like the WannaCry and other attacks which are kind of ransomware related, or you can see the devices within your organization which are susceptible to those attacks, and you can then do something about it before kind of those devices get infected or attacked in that manner. Another key one I just talked about, Windows Defender ATP, is kind of monitoring those end user devices and how do we monitor them from the cloud. because obviously moving to the cloud now, that is kind of the way that industry is going. So kind of from the cloud, what can we do? So we're talking about technologies. So we just talked about ATP, advanced threat protection. So this is the ability to add AI into your organization to kind of learn what is normal behavior. So for example, a user might be accessing from a particular location for the past 6 months, and then suddenly they're accessing from a different country. We've got things like impossible travel scenarios. Have their credentials been compromised on the dark web and things like that. We can now implement technologies around Azure AD and Azure Advanced Threat Protection to learn all of this behavior and find out what is normal behavior in your organization, and then alert you or add some automation into response to that. I talked about conditional access earlier. So when a user is found to be at risk, so there could be an alert for like an impossible travel activity. So for example, they're in one area in the UK at one point, and then suddenly they're accessing from somewhere else. That is we can build some AI into that to prevent them from accessing certain systems, or require them to change their password, or require them to have another MFA prompt or something like that to respond to that. We're also talking about keeping things up to date. So through Windows Update for Business now, making sure that the latest security updates and patches are on devices, making sure that new driver releases and things like that are also included on devices. And then there's also quite a powerful tool called Cloud App Security, and this is the ability to monitor your shadow IT in the organization. So shadow IT, if you're not already aware, is the IT within your organization, which maybe your students are using or your users are accessing, that the IT department is not aware of. So it could be that you always use OneDrive, or you're always using another Microsoft technology to, like SharePoint, to kind of manage your user documents and things like that. And then suddenly users, you get an alert to say somebody's using Dropbox or another third-party tool that isn't sanctioned by the IT department. We can now monitor those activities through Cloud App Security, which is quite powerful. We can do log shipping to Cloud App Security. So if you've got on-premise firewalls or cloud-based firewalls, we can log ship to Cloud App Security to get that idea of kind of what apps and things are being used within your organization. We can add kind of your SIEM integration, so your constant monitoring and analytics tools, you can build them into Cloud App Security. And you can also build policies and governance around alerts and apps which are being built into those. So yeah, monitoring is quite a big one, obviously. Touched on a few technologies here. There's obviously a lot more available in Azure AD and around the Microsoft stack. If you're interested in those, we can help. So yeah, big one there. I've just talked about Cloud App Security. So protecting your sensitive information, detecting threats around your apps, and managing and monitoring your shadow IT in your organization. Okay, so moving on to protecting the data. So we've talked about protecting the identity. We've talked about protecting the devices that people are accessing from. We've talked about monitoring those devices and accessing the system. So now, how do we kind of protect the data which is housed in those in the repositories? So these are the systems which house kind of your information around, I don't know, you might have like student records or exam results and things like that. So how do we protect that information? Because obviously that's quite critical to the education sector. So first of all, we would talk about technology called information protection. And that's about kind of classifying data in the correct manner. So we start by making sure that data is classified in the correct way. Is this highly sensitive information, or is this information which is freely accessible to other people? Is it easy for people to kind of know what is kind of sensitive information within your organization? And we can use information protection to facilitate that. Once we get a good classification strategy going, we can start to apply kind of protection to that labeling strategy. So we can start to apply controls and measures. So when you apply a particular label and send it to people, it might expire after a certain amount of time, so you might only have access to that document for a period of time, or you might only be able to view it. You won't be able to forward it onto other people. The good thing about this technology is the protection stays with the document, rather than the app. Or so, for example, if you're sending something through an email, it doesn't stay with the email; it stays with the attachment or the document which is within that email. Another technology around advanced threat protection. So a big one I talked about earlier around security is the ability to respond to kind of phishing. That's a big one at the moment. So having emails come into the organization that look like genuine emails and are asking users to change passwords, or please click on this link and we'll you need to, your password's due to expire or something like that. User clicks on the link, they've not realized it's a phishing email, and suddenly they've given away their credentials to an unknown attacker. That's quite a big one at the moment, and it's affecting quite a lot of organizations, not just the education sector, also the public and private sectors. So how do we kind of combat that? And the technology is Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection. We can implement policies to kind of scan attachments within kind of a sandbox environment within Office 365 to make sure that it doesn't contain malware or other attacks which could be implemented on a user's machine or something like that. But particularly around phishing, we're talking about your malware, your web filtering, and we're talking about applying impersonation technology, so you can identify the users within your organization, which are kind of key individuals that like decision makers basically, and we can target those users and say, if, for example, somebody sends an email from a Hotmail account or another email account which has got like a similar name, or they're trying to impersonate that user, that decision maker, we can block those emails, or we can advise users on how to protect that. We've got things like safe links, which is the ability to rewrite URLs. So, for example, if somebody does send you an email saying, "Oh, my password's expired, please click on this link," that link will have already been scanned within a sandbox environment, and if it's determined to be malicious, then the user will be prevented from actually accessing that link. There's also tools around attack simulator. So it sounds quite wacky, but the ability to, from an IT department's perspective, to identify the users within an organization who are susceptible to these kinds of attacks, so you can implement your own internal phishing attack to see kind of obviously who is susceptible, and do some end user training around that. You can do kind of dictionary attacks. Anila mentioned earlier about passwords. We do kind of we have like a password offering around identifying weak passwords, duplicate passwords, and things like that within your environment. A similar thing in the cloud. Our offering is for kind of the on-premise environment. So when you've got an on-premise Active Directory, we can run our tools to determine kind of who using your organization who have got weak passwords, and this is all against kind of the NCSC guidelines, and the users who have got duplicate passwords, so the same password as another person in the organization. So obviously, if their account gets compromised, you've also got other accounts in the organization which could potentially be compromised as well. And then kind of there's the security center and the compliance center in Office 365 as well, and this is giving you kind of self-help around secure score, the trust center, and the ability to kind of assess yourself basically against industry best practice. You get a score, and you can improve that score by implementing more secure technology. So, have all your users get MFA? No. Okay, you go in and do that, and then you get more, like 10 points or something. There's people that are quite hot on these, and they like to chase kind of the best score, which is obviously a good thing. These recommendations are kind of coming from Microsoft themselves directly and their security departments. So yeah. The self-help and also the ability to configure policy and things like that from within the Security and Compliance Center. Azure Information Protection, I just talked about that. So it's the classification label, protecting your data, collaborating more securely. So when you're sharing information, like I say, the protection stays with the document. You can, so for example, you shared a document with the wrong person, you can retract that access to those documents as you wish. And that will actually prevent the user that you sent it to from accessing those documents. And adding kind of the visibility and control, which you might already have around that, kind of that data and information. Advanced threat protection, so like I say, getting real-time security, the ability to kind of safeguard against live threats which are happening in your environment, kind of staying focused on what's important and detecting threats quickly. And now another area you might want to go into, you may already be using, is kind of Azure. Azure is obviously your cloud-based platform. You can use it as kind of infrastructure as a service, so you're hosting applications and systems within Azure. You're using software as a service where you're instead of using the running servers and infrastructure within Azure, you're now running services directly on a software-based model. So you're letting Microsoft manage kind of the back end. You know, we're not too interested anymore in looking after servers and maintaining patches and things like that. We're now just focusing on running a platform on a system which is managed on the back end by Microsoft, or we're kind of going the whole kind of Office 365 approach where we're just handing everything off to Microsoft. They're doing all the patching and looking after the security. They've got all the accreditations and everything around the data and making sure that it's encrypted at rest and all that kind of stuff. So if you're doing any of these things, then there's technologies within Azure which you can use to kind of improve your security posture. So there's the Security Center, which is your vulnerability scanning, your analytics and threat intelligence, and it's quite a clever tool around identifying kind of threats which are happening now, and it's kind of the go-to place really in Azure to kind of monitor your security. There's things like Azure Firewall, where you're restricting what can access these resources. You know, quite a rich experience around accessing those applications and resources in Azure. Same as kind of the web application firewall. Azure Advanced Threat Protection, which I talked about earlier, is the AI and the learning and things around what you can do in Azure to protect the users and the identities which are accessing those information. You've got Azure Backup, so maintaining backups within Azure. Obviously, Azure is a global platform, so you could store data within several different data centers if you wish, to kind of your high availability redundancy strategy, which you might not have the ability to do from an on-premise system. Obviously, you've got your Azure Active Directory where you're bringing in a single identity and connecting that to several different applications. Really powerful tool in that sense. And there's obviously Azure Privileged Access Management. So when we're talking about privileged access to systems and maintaining kind of who has control over settings and different measures within your environment, privileged access management, so we can give just-in-time access to users. We can go through an approval process. So for example, a user might not need access to a system for a long period of time. They only might need it for a day or so, and we can configure to say, yes, you can have access for a day, but after a day, you're going to have to request that access. And it kind of avoids that scenario where an IT admin has given access to somebody in the past and they've forgotten to revoke that access, and now that account is no longer used, and it's not being maintained and monitored, and that's the account which is likely to be compromised from an attacker's perspective. And then there's obviously the Azure MFA, which I talked about earlier, so the two-factor authentication, so verifying that the user is who they say they are, and that's all kind of managed from within the cloud. So talking about risual's offering, so we kind of look at a what we call kind of pronged approach. So a customer may wish to only adopt one of these or all three of these. So we kind of do like a review and recommend. So we would review, have a look at your environment, assess what technologies you're using, and kind of have that engagement with yourselves to kind of find out how your users are using IT. And then from that, we can look at kind of what measures you've already got in place, what measures you're looking to implement, and kind of assess from a security perspective. And this is looking at kind of NCSE guidelines, Microsoft guidelines, and any other major security players, kind of what they would recommend. And then we can, from a looking at your environment, kind of suggest what Microsoft technology you could adopt to address some of these concerns. And off the back of that, you would get a report, which is all written up and documented for you to have a look at and suggest improvements. From that, you then may wish to say, oh, okay, some of these recommendations are actually really good ideas. We'd like to implement some of these. And from that, we've got two departments. So we've got our consultancy department, which kind of for some major projects, it might be like a new offering, kind of like working in the modern management way. You know, using technologies like Intune and things like that, we could get the consultancy department involved to kind of help you implement some of those and get you familiar and talk about how that would work in your environment. For some of the smaller engagements, you know, it might be that helping your users adopt MFA and things like that, we could use our managed services department to help you with that and get involved with some of those technologies. And then obviously being a Microsoft partner and being familiar with Microsoft, we've used these technologies kind of in-house ourselves. We work quite closely with Microsoft, so we kind of get we're kind of in the know when new technologies are coming out, and because we kind of work with yourselves and when we've worked with your environment previously, we would then offer, we would then kind of know that this new technology has come out from Microsoft. It was actually, from what we've previously spoken about, or from what we previously said, this is actually a really good idea for you guys. This is how much it would cost to set up. This is what it would look like once it's been implemented and all that kind of stuff. We would do that as an ongoing engagement. So that's kind of the security offering from risual. So we're covering the base where we're seeing what you've already got. So kind of what have you got? Where do you want to get to? And how secure do you want to be? That we're then actually implementing some of these technologies to help you to achieve that, and then we're looking at what's new and what's coming out, any new attacks and things like that, and seeing kind of how you would adopt these going forwards and recommending those to you on an ongoing basis. So I know we've kind of got quite technical there. I hope you managed to follow some of that. If you've got any questions, please feel free to put in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer some of those.
Thank you, Dan. I think that we have our first question.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter, for your question.
Let me just have a quick look.
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah. So Peter's asked, so what sort of resources can risual offer to assist in I assume that's higher HE. In setting a government strategy to allow implementation of information protection. 90% of the work is just process and training 365. Okay. So implementation of information protection. So like I talked about around the main bulk of the work comes from the strategy that you would use as your kind of labeling and categorization of that data. Like you're correct. So 90% of the work is in the process and training of 365. So actually implementing information protection from a technical perspective is probably a really easy thing to do once you've got the licensing available and you've got the access and the knowledge to do that in Azure and set it all up. Quite an easy thing to do. Like you say, the hard thing is actually getting your user to adopt that technology and kind of figuring out what labeling strategy and things you would use to do that. So we've got our consultant data analytics departments that would help you guys adopt that and kind of they would do an engagement where they would look at your business, obviously from the education sector. They would look to see kind of how how your students are using information and kind of advise what would be your ideal labeling strategy from that perspective, and then kind of talk about what protection and things you can do to apply to some of those labels. So and then when we're talking about training and adoption, our education department, we could help come up with proposals and things around that adoption process and work with yourselves to achieve that. I think we've got some of the education guys on the call. They might be able to help further in that sense. But yeah, that's a good question. So another one around all this stuff requires E5 licensing the tenancy. So yeah, some of it does. Some of it comes with E3. You're correct though. Some of the high level stuff which you talked about around privileged access, identity management, and that kind of thing is kind of E5. I know in education there are some particular licenses that those industries can have access to, which are cheaper than some of the ones available to the public and private sector. I think we've got some of the sales guys on the call at the moment. We'll be able to talk about some of the licensing options around those. But obviously they can work with yourselves to kind of figure out what is the best licensing strategy for you guys in terms of that. Another question. Can you help clarify the differences and benefit on Windows Update for Business versus traditional WSUS and SCCM in this sense? Okay, yeah. So Windows Update for Business. So yeah, in a traditional sense, obviously you would have your WSUS, so that would be an on-premise, or that you can even run it on infrastructure as a service in Azure or AWS or something like that. Yeah. But the differences between Windows Update for Business, I guess, is the fact that obviously with SCCM and your WSUS, so you're having to manage the whole process. So you're setting up ADRs, you're setting up update groups and things like that to manage your deployment of updates to users. We're also so Windows Update for Business is basically the cloud version of that, and it's kind of a simplified approach. So you still can kind of configure your kind of pilot groups and your your production groups and things like that, but it's more of a streamlined process now. We're pushing updates directly from the cloud. So rather than having your users managed from like a WSUS server, they're having to go and contact the WSUS server to find out what updates are available, or your SCCM server to pull from an internal environment. We're now in the modern management approach where everything's cloud connected. We're now connecting those users to kind of the Windows Update services directly, and we're managing, rather than kind of saying, oh yes, you can go to Windows Update and you can download any updates that you want. We're still having that level of control over updates. We're still saying, oh yes, we're deferring feature updates for this period of time, or we're doing that kind of. So we're still applying those levels of control which you would have in SCCM. But we're just managing that from the cloud now, and rather than users going directly to an internal server or something like that to get those updates, we're now in the new cloud approach of kind of modern management, autopilot, and that way of working. It's just that having that ability to manage those updates within the cloud. I hope that helps answer that question. I know it's a bit long-winded, but are there any other questions around that can that we need answering, or? Anything that we've talked about in the previous slides that we need, that you'd like to ask questions about, or I realise it was kind of quite technical, but anything you need clarifying, or if not, I might be able to hand back to you, Anila. And
great, thank you very much. Before we end our session, I would like to mention a couple of things. First, on the 25th of June, we have our NXT event here at Risual headquarters. It is an opportunity for you to gain great insights into the industry and information on the latest technology. Not only, you will have the opportunity to meet with our Risual team and network with some of our clients. We will also share with you a glimpse into Microsoft future. If you are happy to attend, please visit our link, which is www.risual.com, Risual NXT customer event. We have only limited places left at the moment. Second, if anybody would like a follow-up call with Dan after this session, we are more than happy to do so. We will follow up with an email, and we will include the option to request a call with Dan and our link to join our NXT event. And we'll be able to cover all the questions that you may have regarding licenses and much more. If it's nothing else, I would like to thank you all for your time, and we hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.